viewers, welcome to this session. You all must have already gone through the interactive video. In that interactive video, as a course coordinator, I have explained about the course Gender Auditing and Gender Budgeting. Today is the first lesson. I will give you an introduction about gender budgeting. Welcome to this session. In this session, you could able to define gender budgeting, and also after listening this lecture, you could able to analyze the linkage between gender and budget. These are the two learning outcomes about today's session. Let us learn about what is gender budgeting. Understanding of gender budgeting and how the gender budgeting strategy facilitates changes in the lives of both men and women, other genders. It is important for us to understand the basics of gender budgeting. You all must be wondering, why do we learn about gender budgeting? In the society, due to the existing socialization process and the patriarchy, both male and female, they have assigned certain roles. Based on their roles, their needs also differs. So, based on their needs, the government and other institutions, they have to allocate required budget to address the needs of the both male and female. Are these government budget gender sensitive? That is the first question it comes to our mind. Let us learn about what is gender budgeting, why do government prepare a gender budgeting, how the gender budgeting differs from the existing budget. Society views men and women differently, laying down different norms and values to divide resources and responsibilities between men and women. How do we change this in a positive direction? So, gender budgeting can allow us to transform the conventional position of women. Once we understand the needs of the women, then the government certainly will allocate enough resources to address the needs of the women. So, resources are very important to address the needs of the male, female, children and other genders. Let us see what is gender budgeting. In this lecture, we could able to explore both theoretical and practical aspects of gender budgeting. This lecture will introduce the concept of gender budgeting and its relevance to contemporary society. As a learner and listeners, we will realize the linkage between budget and gender and how our society determines gender and budget roles. This is very important to know about. Before we get into gender budgeting, first we must learn what is budget. It comes to our mind. First, let us see what is budget. According to Taylor, I quote, "Budget is a financial plan of government for a definite period." I unquote. Again, according to Renee Storm, I quote, "A budget is a document containing a preliminary approved plan of public revenues and expenditure." I unquote. Now, we will see. We have learnt about what is budget. Now, the government has several policies to implement in the overall task of performing its functions to meet objectives of social and economic growth. You all must have gone through various policies and programs of the government. This policy will address to provide drinking water, to address the education of all the population. Even within education, the government has a policies and programs to address the primary education, secondary education and higher education. Like that, the government has several policies to address the needs of the farmers. So, you all must have seen the various policies and programs of the government of India and other governments also. So, when you look at the policy, you all must be wondering what is the wrong with this existing policy. Why do we talk about gender issues in that policy? That is what I have explained in the beginning itself. The needs of the male and female differs according to the assigned roles. This assigned roles has come into existence due to the existing socialization process. Let us discuss separately what is socialization process and patriarchy and other issues. You all must have already know that there is a role differences between male and female, to address these role differences, certainly there should be the policies to address the needs of the both male and female. So, these existing policies, are they addressing the needs of the male, female and other genders? If it is not addressing the needs of the male, female, then it is the time to relook the existing policies, and we have to reformulate the policies to address the needs of the everyone in the society. So, to implement these policies, the government must spend a huge amount of funds on defense, administration, development, welfare project and various other social relief operations. It is therefore necessary to find out all possible sources of getting funds so that sufficient revenue can be generated to meet the mounting expenditure. Here we need to see the planning process also. The planning process of assessing revenue and expenditure is termed as budget. So, every year or sometime the government will plan and assess what is its revenue, how much they could able to spend on various policies and programs. So, the planning process of assessing revenue and expenditure is termed as budget. So, the term budget is derived from the French word budgeter, I quote, which means a leather bag or a wallet. It is a statement of the government's financial plan. It shows the government's income and expenditure during financial year. As far as India is concerned, we generally runs the financial year from 1st April to 31st March. So, thus the budget is the government's most important information document. It also provides information on government policies and programs. So, budget may have two parts. The first part presents the overall picture of the government's financial performance. The second part presents the government's financial plans for the period up to its next budget. In this way, every year the government will prepare the budget and it will present in the parliament to get an approval from the parliament before it gets implemented. So, every citizens of the nation, from an ordinary person to a politician, it is eager to know about the budget, as they would like to get an idea of the, why do we want to know about the government budget? First is that we must know, all of us eager to know what is there in the budget. So, the few significant points I have given in this lecture, why everybody from an ordinary person to everyone, each and every individual in that particular nation, they all eager to know about the budget, as they would like to get an idea of the financial performance of the government over the past year, to know about the financial programs and policies of the government for the following year, to know how their standard of living will be affected by the government's financial policies in the next year. These are the significant points. We must know that because of these significant points, all of us would like to know what is there in the budget. When every year when the government present the budget in the parliament, everybody will eager to listen. What is the government performance in the past year? What about the financial programs and policies of the government for the following year? How to know how their standard of living, our standard of living will affected by the government's financial policies in the next year. Now, we learnt about what is budget, how the budget is prepared, what are the significant points about the budget we have learnt. Now, let us learn about what is gender budgeting. A gender budget is not a separate budget for women. We all must know that when we talk about gender budget, it is not about the separate budget. Instead, it is an approach that can be used to highlight the gap between policy statements and the resources committed to their implementation, thus ensuring that public money is spent in more gender equitable ways. The issue is not whether we are spending the same on women and men, but whether the spending is adequate for women's, men's and other gender needs. This we must understand that as per RACE 22, I have given what is gender budget. So, now we come to know that gender budget, it is not a separate budget for women. Further, gender budgetings are a tool for implementing government's gender mainstreaming commitments. It will link policy commitments across government departments with their budget. As Sharp and Broomhill 2022 explained, I quote, "They are a mechanism for establishing whether a government's gender equality commitments translate into budgetary commitments." I unquote. This statement clearly shows that when they present the gender budget, the government's equality commitments, gender equality commitments translate into budgetary commitments. This is the very important to know that when they are talking about the gender budgeting, we will come to know that the particular government is, they are committed to bring gender equality in the society. When we discuss about gender budget, I have mentioned about gender mainstreaming. Gender mainstreaming is about the mainstream the entire government policies, whether at the state level, national level or subnational level or local level. It is about mainstreaming gender issues at the every sector and every level. So, when we talk about the gender mainstreaming, certainly it is certainly the government will commit. How do they address the gender mainstreaming issues? By allocating required resources to address the gender mainstreaming commitments. Thus, gender budgeting is very important to address the existing government policies, specifically gender equality commitments. Those gender equality commitments will get translated into budgetary commitments. Thus, we come to know that particular government is very committed to address the existing gender inequality to bring the equality in the society. Without a suitable economic underpinning, a government's equality commitments are unlikely to be realized. Thus, gender budget initiatives go beyond the assessment of programs explicitly targeted at women and girls and seek to expose assumptions of gender neutrality within all economic policies, thus raising awareness and understanding that budgets will impact women and men differently because of their different social and economic position. Or now all of you must have understood that male, women and other genders, they have position differently in the society, whether it is a social positioning or economic positioning, they have position differently in the society. Thus, it is important to allocate enough resources to address their needs. Thus, gender budgeting is a very significant tool to address the gender issues in the society. Originally, the initiative was termed women's budget because of the focus was on the impact on girls and women. More recently, the emphasis has shifted to gender as a category for analysis to avoid misunderstanding that activists are working to produce a separate budget for women. On the other hand, gender budgeting involves an analysis of budgetary policies that assess the real impact of income and expenditure on women and men and ensure that programs implemented do not accentuate social and economic inequalities between the sexes. It implies a gender-based assessment of budgets, incorporating a gender perspective at all levels of the budgetary process and restructuring revenues and expenditure to promote gender equality. This is very important. So, if government is committed to bring gender budgeting, certainly the specific government, that any particular government, they will do assessment to understand the existing gender inequalities in the society by incorporating gender perspective at all levels of the budgetary process, whether the budget is prepared at the subnational level, national level, or even equal or local level. It tried to restructure the revenues and expenditure to promote gender equality. The process of gender budgeting eventually result in gender responsive budget. The terms gender responsive budget, gender sensitive budget, gender budget and women's budget are however often used interchangeably. Some government they will use the gender responsive government, some governments they use the term gender sensitive budget, some government they use the term gender budget, some they use women's budget. It depends upon the how they perceive the budget. Accordingly, each government they use the term differently. So, these terms can be interchangeably it can be used. So, the process of gender budgeting eventually results in gender responsive budget. Thus, gender budgeting refers to the process of conceiving, planning, approving and executing, monitoring, analyzing and auditing budgets in a gender sensitive way. It involves analysis of actual government expenditure and revenue on women and girls as compared to on men and boys. It helps the government to decide how policies needs to be made, adjusted, reprioritized, and gender budgeting, as I have already mentioned, it is a tool for effective policy implementation where one can check if the allocations are in line with the policy commitments and are having desired impact. So, what is the meaning of gender budgeting? So far we could able to define what is gender budgeting and we have also learnt about what is budget. Then we could come to know that importance of preparing gender budgeting. Let us give meaning to gender budgeting. The term gender budgeting describes the government expenditure on various programs and policies that address societal gender concern. There are two definitions which describe the term gender budgeting. Let us see what is that definition. Gender sensitive budget, gender budget and women's budget refers to a variety of process and tools aimed at facilitating an assessment of the gendered impacts on government budget. So, if we use the gender budgeting as a tool, what happened is that the government could able to assess the existing gender inequality in the society. For example, I could able to give you a small example, then as a learner and as a listener you could able to know that the importance of preparing a gender budget. If you take an higher education, then we used to assess the like enrollment ratio in the higher education through the GER, gross enrollment ratio. When we look at the gross enrollment ratio, then you could know that we could able to know that how many percentage of the male could able to access the higher education and not only access the higher education, how many of them could able to complete the higher education. Specifically, not only undergraduate program, postgraduate program and doctoral program, how many percentage of the male could able to complete the higher education at various levels. Same thing when it comes to female, then we come to know that how many percentage of the female could able to access as well as complete the higher education. Whether even some of the women they could able to join in the undergraduate level, may not be able to complete or they may not be able to pursue their higher education. After completing the undergraduation, there must be various reasons for them to discontinue the program. Then they may not be able to continue their education, like they may not be able to pursue post graduation or they may not be able to pursue doctoral programs. So, when we talk about the gender budgeting, the government certainly collect the necessary data, how many of them could able to gender disaggregated data, they could able to collect it. Based on the data, they come to know that only less percentage of the female could able to complete the higher education. Then certainly the government has to analyze what is the main reason for the female are not able to complete the higher education or are not able to access the higher education. So, then accordingly they could able to find out the reasons by allocating enough resources to do the various studies. Based on the studies, they could able to know the reasons, then to address those address that gap to access the higher education, the government could able to allocate enough resources to formulate necessary policies and programs to increase the women's percentage in the higher education programs. How do they, like starting more and more colleges in various places, maybe accessibility may be the one reason for the women are not able to access the higher educational institutions, then they need to increase the number of higher educational institutions. Maybe they need financial resources to access the higher education. First, the government will assess the reasons for women for not able to access the higher education. Once they come to know the reasons, accordingly they will formulate necessary policies and programs to increase the women's percentage in higher education. To formulate necessary policies and programs based on gender sensitive manner, it is important to allocate the resources. Here the concept of gender budgeting comes to hand for the government to prepare a budget based on the needs of the male and female. So, in the evolution of this exercise, the focus has been on auditing government budgets for their impact on women's and girls. This has meant that to date, the term women's budget has gained the widest use. Recently, however, these budget exercises have begun using gender as a category of analysis. So, the terminology, I quote, gender sensitive budget is increasingly being adopted. That is why I have given an example of higher educational institutions. It is important to recognize that women's budget or gender sensitive budget are not separate for women or men. This we must understand, that it is important to recognize that women's budgets or gender sensitive budgets are not separate for women or men. They are attempts to break down or disintegrate the government's mainstream budget according to its impact on women and men and different groups of women and men, with a cognizance given to the societies underpinning gender relations. Gender budget initiatives analyze how governments raise and spend public money to secure gender equality in decision making about public resource allocations and gender equality in distributing the impact of government budgets both in their benefits and burdens. The impact of government budgets on the most disadvantaged groups of women is a focus of special attention. The two definitions stress that what I have mentioned in this lecture, stress that gender budgeting is a tool for auditing government budgets to analyze their impact on women and men. It also sees how government money is spent to improve socio-economic conditions of girls, boys, women and men. It also a tool for engendering public economy. Now, let us see the objectives of gender budgeting. First is that the expenditure and taxation policies have different implications for and impacts upon women men regarding their contributions to the paid and unpaid spheres of work. Gender budgeting initiatives can reveal these discrepancies and provide governments with the opportunity to integrate gender analysis into economic policies. According to Sharp and Broomhill, explained that most gender budgeting initiatives have 3 core goals. They seek to, first goal 1 is to mainstream the gender issues with government policies, to promote gender accountability for government's commitments to gender equality and to change budgets and policies. They go on to define the success of gender budget as being contingent upon their record in changing budgetary allocations and policies in a way that promotes gender equality. At times, we can give an example of the UK Women's Budget Group was able through a gender budget analysis and lobbying activities to contribute to the reversal of the proposed change to the tax system that would have shifted money from the purse to the wallet. Other times the results of gender budgeting are less tangible. According to Susan Himmelweit 2002 embraces both equity and efficiency arguments for gender budgeting. She argues that it is important to understand and make visible the different effects of policies on women and men in order to make outcomes fairer between women and men. Additionally, it is necessary to utilize the efficiency arguments which incorporates the different responses of women and men to policy and proposes that these behavioral aspects should also be analyzed and monitored if the policy is to meet its objectives. These are the references. Based on the references, I was preparing this lecture. Hope you understood what is budget, what is gender budget and the objective of the gender budgeting. In the forthcoming lectures, we will learn more about the gender budgeting, how the gender budgeting has to be implemented, what is revenue budget, all those aspects related to gender budget, as well as we will learn about what is gender mainstreaming, how the tools both gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting is significant to address the issues of the both male, female and other genders. Thank you so much.